The Feeding of Blackwood Manor. The Silent Invitation. The rain in Scotland didn't just fall, it tried to erase the world. Elias Thorne watched the windshield wipers of his rental car fight a losing battle against the storm. Ahead, the iron gates of Blackwood Manor stood open, like the jaws of a beast waiting to snap shut. He shouldn't have taken this job. The pay was exorbitant, suspiciously so, for a simple architectural appraisal of an old estate on the Isle of Skye. But Elias had debts, and debts drowned out the voice of intuition. The house itself was a monstrosity of Victorian Gothic architecture, perched precariously on a cliff overlooking the churning Atlantic. It was a jagged silhouette of turrets and gargoyles, black against the bruising purple of the twilight sky. He parked. The silence that followed the engine cutting off was heavy, almost pressurized. He grabbed his bag and ran for the heavy oak doors. Inside, the air was colder than the storm. The foyer smelled of damp wood, old paper, and something sweet like rotting lilacs. "Mr. Thorne!" Elias jumped. A woman stood on the grand staircase. She was impossibly old, her skin like crumpled parchment, dressed in a severe black maid's uniform that belonged in the 1920s. "Mrs. Gable?" Elias asked, recalling the email instructions. "Supper is at 8. Do not leave your room after midnight. The house settles and the pipes groan." Her voice was dry, lacking any inflection. "Here is your key, the master bedroom on the second floor." She dropped a heavy brass key into his palm. Her fingers were ice cold. Before he could ask about the owners, she turned and vanished into the shadows of the hallway. Elias shivered. He told himself it was just the draft. The painted eyes. Elias spent the first few hours measuring the structural integrity of the main hall. It was pristine, too pristine. For a house built in 1894, there was no dust, no cobwebs. It was as if the house was maintaining itself. At 7 p.m., he went upstairs to his room. It was lavish, dominated by a four-poster bed and a massive oil painting above the fireplace. The painting depicted a man in a 19th century suit, standing in front of the manor. His face was stern, but his eyes, they were painted with a hyper-realism that was unsettling. Elias unpacked his laptop. He tried to get a signal, but there was nothing. He was cut off. He sat on the bed, staring at the painting. The man in the portrait seemed to be looking slightly to the left. Elias turned his head. To the left was the bathroom door. He looked back at the painting. The man was looking straight at him. Elias blinked hard. "Get a grip, Elias," he muttered. He walked to the canvas and touched it. The oil paint was dry, cracked with age. It was just a trick of the light. He went to the bathroom to wash his face. As he splashed cold water on his skin, the silence of the house was broken. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It sounded like nails on wood, coming from the bedroom. Elias froze, water dripping from his chin. He grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the vanity and stepped back into the bedroom. Empty. He looked at the painting. The man in the portrait was now smiling. A subtle, cruel upward curve of the lips that definitely hadn't been there before. The Ledger dinner was a silent affair. Mrs. Gable served a stew that tasted metallic. She didn't eat. She just watched him. "Who owns this place now?" Elias asked, the sound of his fork hitting the plate echoing too loudly. "The house," she said simply. "Yes, but who holds the deed?" "The deed is irrelevant, Mr. Thorne. Ownership implies control. No one controls Blackwood." Frustrated, Elias retreated to the library after dinner. If he couldn't get answers from her, he'd find them in the paperwork. He found a leather-bound ledger on the desk, dating back to 1912. It belonged to a Silas Blackwood. He began to read. The entries started mundane expenses for coal, repairs to the roof. But by 1914, the tone shifted. October 14th, 1914, "The soil here is hungry. The crops die, but the weeds grow thick and red. I hear it beneath the floorboards. It demands a tithe." November 2nd, 1914, "The servants are leaving. They say the shadows have teeth. I have locked the east wing. I swear I saw the hallway stretch, becoming longer as I walked it." December 24th, 1914, "It is not a house. It is a skin. And we are the parasites living upon it. It wants to scratch us off." The last entry was scribbled in erratic, heavy strokes. "Don't let the fire go out. Darkness is how it digests." Elias slammed the book shut. The fire in the library grate sputtered and died instantly. The room plunged into absolute darkness. The architecture of madness. Elias fumbled for his phone, using the flashlight beam to cut through the gloom. He needed to leave. Now. The money wasn't worth this. He headed for the main doors. He remembered the path clearly, down the corridor, left at the staircase, through the foyer. He walked down the corridor. He turned left. There was no staircase. Instead, the corridor stretched out into an infinite darkness, lined with doors that hadn't been there before. The architecture was wrong. The angles of the ceiling didn't make geometric sense. They seemed to fold in on themselves, inducing nausea just by looking at them. "Mrs. Gable!" he shouted. His voice didn't echo. The walls absorbed the sound immediately. He turned around to go back to the library, but the library door was gone. Behind him was a solid wall of dark, pulsating wood. He was trapped in a hallway that shouldn't exist. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in his chest. He ran. He sprinted down the endless corridor, his footsteps thudding against the carpet. He passed the same grandfather clock 3 times. He passed the same vase of dead lilies 5 times. He stopped, gasping for breath. A door to his right slowly creaked open. Inside was his apartment in London. It was impossible. He stepped closer. He saw his own living room, his TV, his cat sleeping on the sofa. It was a perfect replica, but everything was slightly grey. "Come in, Elias," a voice whispered from the room. It sounded like his own voice. He slammed the door shut and backed away. "This isn't real. Hallucinogenic gas, mold spores." He tried to rationalize, but deep down, he knew the physics of the world had broken. The thing in the cellar. Elias wandered for what felt like hours. His watch had stopped at 12 a.m. exactly. He found a staircase leading down. It wasn't the grand staircase. This was narrow, made of rough stone. It smelled of earth and copper. Blood. Drawn by a morbid compulsion, he descended. The air grew hotter, humid like a jungle, despite the Scottish winter outside. At the bottom lay the cellar, but it wasn't a storage space. The floor was dirt, and in the center was a massive circular pit. The edges of the pit were lined with bones, animal and human, fused together with some black tar-like substance. Standing at the edge of the pit was Mrs. Gable. She was facing away from him, swaying back and forth. "Mrs. Gable," Elias whispered. Her head snapped around 180 degrees. The sound of vertebrae cracking echoed like a gunshot. Her face was gone. In its place was a smooth, featureless surface of skin, save for a vertical slit where a mouth should be. "The digestion begins," the slit whispered. She didn't attack. She simply fell backward into the pit. She didn't scream. From the darkness of the hole, a sound emerged, a wet, slurping sound. Then the house shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. The walls began to bleed thick, dark, viscous fluid oozing from the mortar. The reflection. Elias scrambled back up the stairs, his mind fracturing. He burst into a hallway on the second floor. He needed a window. He would jump. A broken leg was better than this. He found a window at the end of the hall. He smashed the glass with a heavy bust of a Roman emperor. He looked out, expecting to see the storm, the cliff, the sea. There was nothing, literally nothing. No ground, no sky, no stars. Just a void of swirling grey mist. The house was floating in nothingness. Blackwood Manor had severed itself from reality. He collapsed against the wall, sliding down to the floor. He looked into a tall mirror across the hall. His reflection was standing up. Elias looked at his hands. He was sitting. He looked at the mirror. His reflection was standing, staring down at him with a look of pure malice. The reflection raised a hand and pointed at Elias. Then the reflection reached out of the glass. A cold, hard hand grabbed Elias by the throat. He gagged, clawing at the arm, but it was solid. The reflection pulled. It was dragging him into the mirror. Elias kicked out, his boot connecting with the glass. It shattered. The grip released. Elias fell back, gasping. Where the mirror had been, there was now just the wooden backing. But on the floor, amidst the shards of glass, was a piece of paper. It was a page from the ledger he had read earlier. A page he hadn't seen. December 25th, 1914. The house does not hunt. It lures. It needs a keeper, one to maintain the structure, one to feed the walls. I am too old. The new one must be young, strong. The merger. The house was shrinking. The ceiling was lowering, the walls closing in. The groan of the pipes became a scream. Elias realized the truth. The house wasn't haunted. The house was an organism, a stomach, and it was constricting to digest him. He ran to the master bedroom. The painting of Silas Blackwood was different now. The man was gone. The background of the painting showed the room Elias was currently standing in. And in the painting, Elias was standing there screaming. "I won't do it!" Elias yelled at the ceiling. "I won't be your keeper!" The floorboards erupted. Tentacles made of wood and velvet shot up, wrapping around his ankles. He fell, his fingernails tearing into the expensive carpet. He was dragged toward the fireplace. The fire was unlit, but the darkness within the chimney was swirling like a vortex. "Join us!" the walls boomed. It wasn't a voice, it was the vibration of the structure itself. Elias grabbed the iron poker from the fireplace. He swung it wildly, smashing the wooden tentacles. They bled red blood. He scrambled toward the door, but the door frame had melted. The wood had fused, sealing the room. He was sealed in the stomach of the beast. The new keeper. Elias backed into the corner. The room was pulsing. The wallpaper looked like veiny skin. He looked at the painting again. The figure of Elias in the painting was moving. It was beckoning him. "There is no escape," a voice whispered in his ear. It was Silas Blackwood's voice. "But there is integration." The wooden tendrils wrapped around his chest, squeezing the air out of him. His ribs creaked. He looked at the window, the void outside. He looked at the painting. To become part of the house was the only way to survive. To become the consciousness of the walls. "Yes," Elias gasped, his vision fading. "Yes." The house stopped shaking instantly. The tentacles loosened, but they didn't let go. Instead, they gently pulled him up. They didn't retreat. They merged with him. Elias watched in horror and fascination as his skin turned to the color of oak. His fingers stiffened and elongated, turning into the carved armrests of the chair he was forced into. He tried to scream, but his mouth filled with varnish and dust. Epilogue 6 months later. The sun shone brightly on the Isle of Skye. A black sedan pulled up the gravel driveway of Blackwood Manor. A young woman stepped out, shielding her eyes from the sun. She held a clipboard. She was a restoration specialist, hired to appraise the sudden reappearance of the estate after it had been listed as condemned for decades. She walked up to the heavy oak doors. They swung open before she could knock. Inside, the house was immaculate, smelling of fresh lemon and beeswax. A man stood at the top of the grand staircase. He was handsome, pale, dressed in a suit that looked slightly outdated. His eyes were intense, watching her with a hunger that she mistook for hospitality. "Welcome," said Elias Thorne. His voice was smooth, like velvet over stone. "I have been expecting you. The house has been waiting." Behind him, the painting above the fireplace had changed. It now showed two figures. Elias, standing in the foreground, and in the background, a faint shadowy outline of a woman waiting to be painted in. "Come in," Elias smiled. "Supper is at 8. The heavy doors slammed shut, sealing out the light.